Welcome to the broadcast, everybody, and a happy Sunday to you. Here I am again in my red velvet and knickers. If only you guys knew exactly what was going on beneath the screen. If only you knew, my dear. But I'd have to charge for that, wouldn't I? Now, we've got a chock-full show today. Lots of royal matters and Harkle matters to discuss at the beginning, and then we are going to have a nice rambly tip jar corner afterwards for those of you who are fans of tip jar corner. So I will furnish the box below with timestamps for your delectation. We're going to begin with Prince Harry and this Polo thing that is upcoming on Netflix. It's called Polo. It is not as exciting as anything Jilly Cooper produced for us. It's a five-parter featuring Nacho Figueras. And we are told by the press that advanced screenings have come to the attention of those at Netflix because it's been executive produced by the executives of Archwell, the Duke and Duchess of Not Muchness. And apparently it is Nachos, or Cheesy Nachos, as I refer to him, who is stealing the show with his film star good looks, that boy crush of Harry's. Oh, Nachos, oh, Cheesy, come and please me. Well, Netflix are disappointed, we hear, because they expected more bang for their buck. And what they mean by that is they expected more solicitations from the Duke, more gossip, more tea to be sipped, and they're not getting it. The content is not being provided. Remember Ben Brownlows we spoke of in the last broadcast, head of content? There was no content to be head of, was there, my dear? Unless it was disparagements about the royal family. And they're no longer forthcoming, so everything's boring, including this episode of Polo. Netflix, you do better with fiction, pure fiction such as Harry and Meghan. Remember that tale, that tall tale, that fable of Aesop's, Harry and Meghan, their true story. It might as well have been called, but it wasn't true, it was a lie, and it was dramatised and fabricated, rather like Baby Reindeer, which I adored, by the way. I can't remember if we spoke about it before, but I adored Baby Reindeer. Just so fabulous, the performances were thrilling, and the pub that's involved in that, the Hawley Arms, is one that I'm very well acquainted with, so it had a sort of surreal twist for me to be watching it as well. But I adored that show, but the people at Netflix were stupid enough to furnish it with the tagline saying that this is a true story. This is what they pegged on to the beginning of it. Now, if it had said it was inspired by real-life events or based on a true story, that would be one thing. But which Einstein signed that off? This is a true story. Which Einstein? Because, of course, they're going to be open to libelous and slanderous lawsuits and all of this, which they are now. And the woman involved in this, the person behind the character, is suing, isn't she, for hundreds of millions? Well, there you go. According to Mail Online, there are millions unaccounted for in the 990 forms, the tax returns coming from Archwell. Now, I happen to believe, as this article goes on to suggest, that in fact these missing millions will appear at a later date in one of their returns, because it would be fraught with controversy if it was not to appear. But Archwell was in fact gifted 2 grants of over $6 million over the past 2 years, and neither appear in their latest return. Cooking up a storm in the kitchen still, are we, Meghan? Or cooking the books? That's not my aspersion, but it is what Mail Online are warning us to beware of and to look out for. And we will be looking over your forthcoming accounts and your tax returns and your 990. You left some beautiful comments regarding the death of Dame Maggie Smith on the previous broadcast, and the King actually sprang up to leave his condolences and said, "My wife and I were deeply saddened to learn of the death of Dame Maggie Smith. As the curtain comes down on a national treasure, we join those around the world in remembering with the fondest admiration and affection her many great performances and her warmth and wit that shone through both on and off the stage." And King Charles, or King Cosy Socks as we know him when he is in Scotland, was actually at Holyrood to mark the 25th anniversary of the Scottish Parliament, and he hailed the uniquely special place that Scotland holds in the hearts of his family and celebrated the enduring relationship between its Parliament, its people and the Crown. And Holyrood's presiding officer told the King, "Your presence here today, as we mark the significant milestone, demonstrates your continuing commitment. We are grateful for the encouragement and counsel that we've received over these last 25 years from the late Queen and from you." The King spoke of his affection for the country, its landscape, and its beauty, and the strength of character that springs from a complex Caledonian kaleidoscope, as he put it. "My grandmother was proudly Scottish," he told us, and Alexander Douglas Hamilton, the 16th Duke of Hamilton, carried the crown of Scotland on a sumptuous cushion, and Queen Camilla wore Queen Mary's diamond thistle brooch, which was modelled on King George's flaccid penis, and oh, how it glittered. And Tommy Parker Bowles, as well as feeding himself lots of yummy food, has been feeding us little morsels, my dear, little insights from inside the palace walls, so to speak. He tells us in an online diary, these are just little snippets from it, "At 1 p.m, I know some people might visit their family for a bite to eat on a Saturday, but I don't tend to nip down to Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, as my mother is usually in the country at weekends now. I'm more likely to see her and Charles in the week, and when I do visit, I have a special high security card that grants me access, and no, she doesn't leave a spare key under a flower pot. I know the palace policeman well, as do my kids, so I just flash the card and they let us in and we go and say hi and have a cup of tea, and for the kids that's entirely normal. If I don't know whether my mother is in or not, I usually find out just by reading the paper and realising, oh, she's on a royal tour this weekend." Charles, who genuinely is the loveliest man in the world, and I'm not just being oily, knows so much about food and loves his food as does my mother. 9:30 p.m, we'll sit down to eat and have another bottle of wine. Sadly, asking my mother if her and Charles fancy joining us to polish off a rib of beef isn't really a possibility. They've got amazing chefs, so why would they bother coming here? But I'm sure if I asked and booked it far enough ahead in the diary, they might come. Well, it's curious, he used the word oily to describe the fact that he wasn't being oily when he said that the King is the loveliest man in the world. Which is very sweet, wasn't it, my dear, for a stepson to say about a stepfather, king or no king. And in our world, the word oily, or using the word oilers to describe certain characters, is the thing, my dear. You will often hear me say, for example, when I'm talking about the Duchess of Sussex, that she gets in their oil don't. She gets in their oil don't, this oily creature. Do you understand? And Richard Kay revealed this week that the late Diana used that descriptor after he warned her that Mohamed Al-Fayed, the father of Dodi, was not the cuddly figure that he liked to appear at the Harrods sale. Diana bridled, he tells us. She said she'd had a lifetime spotting charlatans who pirouetted around her former husband. Oilers, she called the people who sucked up to the Prince of Wales. Well, evidently she was blind to the oilers in her own vicinity. Dame Paul of the Borough being chief among them, my dear, the indiscreet servant that he turned out to be, the rock that cracked. As for Al-Fayed, I'm sure you've seen all the headlines over the last few weeks and the enormous scandal surrounding him. You can go and find out, if you don't already know, what a demon and a monster he has been revealed to be when he was alive. There are lots at this very moment in time who stand with egg on their faces, who have been portraying him as a victim of the establishment, such as Netflix, actually. And I've got a great deal of time for Netflix. I watch quite a lot of their output. I like the sort of suspense mysteries that you get, the true crimes, this kind of thing. I rather enjoy that, my dear. But, and Virgin River. Waiting for the next series of that. Love a bit of Virgin River. So, I have no hatred for Netflix, but, when it came to The Crown, which I also enjoyed very much, and I remember telling you, I really enjoyed the performance of the guy that was playing Al-Fayed. Fantastic performance, one of the best in that series. But I knew that we were watching sophistry, more than a reimagining of that man's character. And now, the makers of The Crown look ridiculous, and rightly so. The press are going mad for all of this. It's just a shame that Mr. Al-Fayed isn't alive to bear the brunt of all the repercussions of his behaviour. And when you compare him to poor old Pip Schofield, and I don't care what anybody says, Philip Schofield had an affair with a consenting man who was of age. I don't care about the age gap. I don't care if they initially met when the chap he had an affair with was 15. It's nobody's business. It's between him and his wife, who is standing by him and has forgiven him evidently. And as I told you at the time, the way out of proportion response to try and hound that man has been so ungratifying to witness, I've got to tell you. He was made out to be what the likes of Mohamed Al-Fayed actually are and were. You know, that is a monster. That is a demon. Can we please see the perspective here? The difference when you're talking about the damage inflicted on the lives of hundreds or thousands of women in this particular case. And I never said, and I'm not saying now, that Philip Schofield led a blameless life. That is not what it's about. It's saying that it's no worse than half a dozen people down your street. He needn't be held up to have his life ruined again and again and again, made out to be an absolute monster. He behaved like a twat. That's about it. That's about it. It's very upsetting to see how vicious people are in the wake of all of that. Some sadism involved in twisting the knife there. Eamon Holmes being chief among them. Well, karma in action there. With many people discovering since then the character of that man. Team Ruth all the way, my dears. Team Ruth all the way. What a fabulous woman she is. Al-Fayed was a demon, giddy on power, and he was flash, and this impressed Diana. The flattery worked on the late Diana, and if she had taken advice to give him a wide berth, along with remembering to put on a seatbelt, because for one of the only times in her life she didn't on this occasion, but you know, it was in a Fayed-funded vehicle with Fayed-funded security. She might have been alive had things been different, but you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda, I understand that. He went on to accuse the late Duke in the most vulgar way of having involvement in what he called the murder of Diana and Dodie, didn't he? Do you remember all of that? And for any of you who might have fallen for that sort of conspiracy wormhole, are you quite so certain about the impeccable word of Mohamed Al-Fayed now that all of these revelations have come to life? You know, people actually listened to those theories, those daft theories, although in fairness, Dodie, by all accounts, was a decent man. So his late memory should not be judged on the sins of the father. By all accounts, he was a decent man. Mohamed was a climber, and was an astonishingly successful climber, I've got to tell you. So don't get it twisted. While I am not drawing an exact comparison to Meghan, seriously, there is no comparison whatsoever. He was a wicked monster in a very different sort of way, and a very grave and serious way, on an epic scale, my dear. So I'm not saying that Meghan was anything like that. But what I am saying, and the comparison I am drawing, is Diana to Harry, because it appears to be a Spencer trait or an aspect of their personality that is impressionable despite their already elevated status and privileged position in society. They are impressionable to the razzle-dazzle, aren't they, my dears? The Dianas and the Harrys of this world. The razzle-dazzle, that little bit of spice on the meal. Susceptible to charm and flattery. And Harry has inherited this trait for falling for opportunistic oilers, as Tommy Parker Bowles put it, and as the late Diana put it. Oilers can be exciting. This is the thing, you see, my dear. They can be exhilarating, and they can be fun. They can be brilliant fun. I've known a few myself that have tried to oil and worm their way in. The thing with me is I can spot it, but sometimes I will allow them to have a little bit of fun. They don't get the better of me, but you know. Sometimes they can be tolerated in small doses at an arm's length, you know, when there's just a little bit of oil creeping in. But I know, I've got it going on up here, my dear, and I'm sure that you can sniff it out. But you see, one needs to have a protective instinct developed, because not all strikes of oil lead to gold. As oily as they may be, that oil may not lead to a well of liquid gold. Do you understand, my dear? Sometimes, as with the raglan gal, it just leads to a greasy puddle. The Duchess of Edinburgh put the red in the white and blue at Wells Cathedral, of which she is royal patron. She was a vision in crepe couture by Valentino, our Valentine Duchess, attended a concert by the Drakensberg Boys Choir, trotting in on pink Jimmy Choos. And earlier, at the Domaine Evremond Winery in Kent, she was dapper in Houndstooth by Vince. She unveiled a plaque for its opening, and Kent is known as the Garden of England, and the verdant, lush landscape that you can see here shows you exactly why. My lords, ladies and ladyboys, it is time for Tip Jar Corner, so come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Welcome to Tip Jar Corner, my dears. We've got a busy one today, my dear. I've got paintings to show you, trinkets, tiaras, some vintage ephemera, all kinds of delights, all kinds of delights. So I'm going to begin with these two artworks, and I want your opinions on both of them, because they weren't the easiest buys. Both I found on auction sites going very cheap, so I gave them a look. Now, this first one is going to be a struggle to hold up and will probably reflect back poorly into the lens, and it's really heavy. It's a 1970s watercolour, and it was described as a book illustration, so I don't know if it went on to appear in some sort of book. I did notice on the inside back of the frame it was written in pencil, page 53, book 1, so it might have appeared in a book somewhere. If you recognise it, please do let me know, because this piece is full of mystery. Now, for some reason, the measurements went over my head. It was described as 16 by 11. Perhaps I thought that it was centimetres instead of inches, but the whole thing together is 19 by 24 inches, which was larger than I expected it to be. You see, nobody wanted this piece when it came up for auction. I got it for £16. So I thought I'd got a bargain. The picture really made me smile. That's why I liked it. There's something about the unbuckling of a belt that is rather alluring, but also it was the wit of this piece and the fact that the illustration reminded me a little bit of Quentin Blake, the way that the lady is rendered here. And it's got a sort of retro appeal to it, hasn't it? It's got a very 70s sort of look to it, which I really enjoyed. And I thought I was getting a bargain, my dear, for £16. Well, it turned up after I had to pay the quote for the shipping, which was 30 quid, so it was twice the price of the piece for the shipping. And I thought, why is it so much? I would never have bid on it if I knew that the shipping was going to be that much, and I didn't understand why it was that expensive. And then when it came through, I totally understood, because it was heavy. The frame was so heavy, really heavy. I don't find the frame attractive at all, so the frame has to go anyway. I'm afraid I don't like it. It's got this heavy hardwood surrounding it. But what is absolutely maddening to me is that I've taken it out of the frame here so that it won't shine and glare onto the screen. I do love it, but I wouldn't give it house room. It's too large, so I'm not quite sure what to do with it. But what's maddening me is that I can't work out the history of it. You know, there's something scrawled here on it, but I can't make out most of the words. I certainly can't make out the name. And there was nothing hidden inside when I took it out of the frame. Sometimes you get wonderful, marvellous little clues, but there were no secrets to be found. So one of the reasons that I'm showing it to you, as well as to allow you to enjoy the illustration, because it is a wonderful illustration. I really do like it, actually. It would be better if it was smaller, but perhaps if it was ever published anywhere or in a book, then it would have appeared smaller, wouldn't it? Of course. But I do enjoy it very much. But if you happen to recognise the illustrator or can enlighten me on any secrets of the story, then that would be very interesting. Now, the next painting that I got was rather different. And of course, the name of the piece struck me, River in the Woods. And I liked the composition of it. The artist is basically unknown. But I liked the composition, I liked the trees and the water, especially the reflections in the water, I thought was nice. I can't tell if it's daybreak or dusk. I don't know. What do you think? But it had an honest quality, a sort of bleakness about it, which I appreciate. And I liked the light. The trouble is, when it turned up, it looked much darker in person than it did on the photography from the auction website. Much darker. It's got a much more foreboding feel that I don't really like to be surrounded with. Do you understand, my dear? I'm just interrupting during the editing to say that as I placed it on the wall to showcase it to you, it suddenly came to life, and I love it. As you can see, a little patch on it needs touching up, and I wouldn't go to any great pains other than get a little paintbrush myself and touch it up myself. And that creature in the middle of it, you know, initially I thought it was a cow, but my sister told me that it was a goat. And then my mum said that it had the body of a goat and the head of a cow. Or was it the other way around? Anyway, whatever it is, I'm not quite sure. But I am going to hang it eventually. I'm going to hang it and sit with it. Let's put it that way, if I find the right spot for it in the right room. But if I don't love it, if I don't really fall in love with it, or if it makes me feel a bit uneasy, then it's going at some point. But I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on it. But let's get on to some tip jar trinkets, shall we? And some juicy gems, because they're always viewer favourites and also favourites of mine. Here we have a great find that really excites me. I've called it the Aegean demi-parure. It is a dazzling fiesta of brilliant blues, diamond and pearl drop on bright gold. And I've picked up quite a few similar parures like this. In reds and greens, I often see them in those sort of colours, Christmassy colours, but never blue before. And so I was so excited when I saw this one. And it reminds me so much of Greek Mediterranean, actually. That's what it conjured in my memories. Oceanic surf under sunshine, blue eyes, the Aegean Sea, if you will. So that is why I named it the Aegean demi-parure. And I'm so happy with the find. And it was just £12. From a local charity shop, as most of these trinkets and things are. And this is what most of your tip jar treats go towards, these little trinkets and tchotchkes, and of course the occasional cup of coffee for moi. And here we have the saber-toothed stone necklace, misty undulating lozenges, each stone a wavy ombre curved tooth punctuated by faceted beads strung on silver, a contemporary rendering of tribal jewellery. The lucent stones teased the light, and it was just £5. And now we turn to the turning leaf brooch. At £3, this gives us shades of autumn, orangey gold and bronze, with the final green glimmers of summer, furnishing the air and the ground with their free-fall confetti, breaking free from a feathery twiglet of pale gold. Lushly lovely. And here we have a pair of clip-ons, fashion earrings. I'm not sure which fashion these are after, but at £2 they were a fun bargain. Large paste stones emulating rubies and framed by miniature gold baubles with globular petals of blue, green and amethyst. Fun, fun, fun. And here is the Mysteries of Mercury pendant. A snaky silver chain, and I haven't seen the likes of this chain before. This is a new invention for my eyes. It's articulated and slinks about in a serpentine fashion. Never seen such a thing before. Metallic marbles guard a mysterious grey heart, which is deep and watery and mercurial. And this large heart is full of secrets that want to foil and evade your gaze. You can't quite find what you're looking for in amongst that watery depth. A heart doomed to be admired but never loved. And for those of you that enjoy ephemera, here is a Victorian scrapbook. I'm afraid the pages have all come apart here, but it's lovely to look through and enjoy all the greetings cards that were pasted and enjoyed so many decades ago. And when I looked through the cards that will open, because most of them are stuck fast and I don't want to ruin the pages and the cards by prizing them off. They are stuck really, really hard on. So unfortunately, I can't unravel lots of the mysteries, but I was able to see that some of the cards are addressed to a Fanny and a Willie. You couldn't make it up, could you? Really, very Enid Blyton-esque. Fanny and Willie. Thank you for this gorgeous collection of cards. And as you know, I have an obsession with the language of yesteryear. And I love and am so inspired by the language that you find on these cards. And I've got to tell you, I've got a great deal of them in my collection that I've compiled over the years. A great deal of these sort of greetings cards with fond wishes, bright wishes, regards, when the word regards meant something a little more intimate. To greet you, this card is to greet you. All this sort of thing. And you see so many depictions of nature with berries and squirrels and scenes and holy scenes, and every sentiment is a pure delight. Every image is so delicate, and it makes one marvel and wonder at the technical advances that there were in this Victorian era in the press, the way that they were able to create such fantastic looking material, intricate designs, and a sort of artistry which is sorely lacking now, isn't it, my dear, if you compare it to anything. In the shops, at the present moment, there's really no comparison, is there? There's just such beauty, such coziness, such deliciousness in these old cards. And I was able to put a location because Falmouth in Cornwall was mentioned on a few of the addresses from incoming greeters, if you will. One was Buddock Terrace in Falmouth. So one of my habits is to look on Street View and see if I can find the actual addresses in the old streets and imagine where these people who sent the cards and were receiving cards, where they lived, and to see if their houses still exist, which most of them do, sometimes down to the street number, which is always a thrill. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Now, tiaras, a bit of headwear for you, my dear. I'm going to show you 4. 2 of them I've already worn and you've seen. 2 of them are to be worn in upcoming broadcasts. This is the Citrine Star of Warner. And I've got no idea if it's inspired by Art Deco, but it reminds me of Art Deco Americana, and it actually put me in mind of the logo for Warner Bros. You know the one? The same sort of shape? That's why I've named it after Warner Brothers. The Citrine Star of Warner, with these thin strands that are strong yet very delicate, with hidden shards in the centre of each one for glinting, and citrine flowers running along the band as 10,000 diamonds scintillate. And just in case people don't understand, when I use descriptors such as diamonds and rubies, I am using my imagination a little bit there, my dear. You know, they're basically alternative nicknames for glass. Glass and plastic. So no, I'm not trying to suggest that they are the real thing, but they're just as pretty in many cases, so who cares? And here is the Fruit Machine Waltzer, which was so gorgeous and so delicious and so luscious. The way that I paired it, as we discussed before, my dear, with that jacket that I was wearing with the colours, I cannot believe how well they went together. This candied confection with tones that matched my jacket precisely. It was serendipitous to the max, beyond scrumptious, and reminiscent of a fairground to my mind, and waltzers, the whimsical design of the ups and downs with red, yellow, lilac, brown, sort of brown used very effectively here. You wouldn't think that a brown stone would be especially exciting, would you? But it's actually the brown stone here that I think that makes it and turns down the temperature a bit on the more sort of bright primary colours of this piece and captivates. Wonderful. Milk white, turquoise, pink, mint and champagne stones. A real favourite. Gorgeous. And here is the jade daisy chain headband, which I've yet to wear, and it's fragile. and it is simple, with a minty jade stone and diamante petals, 3 in number, on wire and glittery bands, a solar system of stones for pure pleasure's purpose. Delicious. And here is the pastel milkstone tiara, which I've yet to wear, and perhaps it's a little bit cottagecore, if you will. One hears about this cottagecore, and I don't know why, but it reminds me of heathery brambles. The milky pastels, apricots, sages and teasels on antiqued gold, and designed with crescents and lavishes. It's the fairy moss at the bottom of your garden, a heathery tangle of gemmy tumbleweed for a prince or princess of nature. Here is a simple tiara, or a band, I suppose you could say, and there's not much to say about it. Its honest beauty does all the talking. So that's enough gems and jewels for the moment, my dear. But now I'm going to show you this book, and we're finishing on this. But this is why I adore the world of the second hand, and why I love to idle away the hours digging out these vintage finds, charity shop pieces, old bits of ephemera, and they reveal and unravel so many mysteries. And I love going on a journey of discovery. You can really go on unknown voyages of discovery with these old pieces and the hidden clues that you can pick up from acquiring them. I encourage anybody who has never embarked on this sort of journey to give it a try if you haven't before, and see where it takes you, because one can't imagine where it's going to take you, as I discovered with this simple book that I picked up. And I picked it up only because we had been discussing Althorp or Althorp or Althorp, the many pronunciations of it, Earl Spencer's estate. And I told you that for me and my family, it's always been Althorp, and always will be Althorp. And I also told you that that is how the Spencer family historically pronounced it, and it's how the current Earl Spencer always used to pronounce it, until, sort of under pressure, in recent years, he began bowing to pressure from the local community, who in the main refer to it as Althorp, and to many here in the kingdom and abroad, because he had so many American fans coming over to visit, that would assume that, understandably assume that it would be pronounced Althorp. And you told me in the comments that you had heard others, I believe even others on YouTube and beyond, saying that it's Althorp and referring to it as Althorp. Well, that does happen. It depends in which world you come from and what you are used to and what you've heard. You know, if you are involved with the aristocracy, for example, and you were au fait with the Spencers, then you would call it what the Spencer family called it, which was Althorp, until very recently.
Thank you for having us here to Althorp, as I always thought it was called, but in fact we should call it Althorp, shouldn't we?
Well, it's two things. It's one of the very few names in England that has two official pronunciations, according to the BBC.
And it's almost as if he bowed to the pressure eventually and began referring to it as Althorp himself.
And Althorp is very much what I go with day to day, because that's how it looks and how it should sound. Althorp is going back a few centuries.
And there was an interesting article about this. I'll leave the link to it in the description box. And it tells us how in 1992 the Earl Spencer of that era, Diana's father, confirmed that indeed the pronunciation was Althorp. And he said that that was definitely correct, and that's how his grandfather and his great auntie would pronounce it, Althorp. And it was in this article that I saw mention of the BBC Pronouncing Dictionary of British Names. Well, I got on the old eBay and I furnished myself with a copy of it, an old second-hand version of it. It was just a few quid on eBay. And it's interesting, and it has so many of our place names here, the BBC pronunciation of all these places. And it's easy to get the hump with the BBC. You know, it can be full of various biases these days and a lot of wokery, but it wasn't always the way, and it was something I grew up very proud of. You know, world-class, envy-inducing broadcasting house with so many different spokes to the wheel throughout the world of classical music and radio drama and broadcasting, high quality over many areas of life. And pronunciation was one of those things that it was a standard bearer of, received pronunciation in particular. It was, and I suppose still is, an authority for that sort of prescribed pronunciation. Under the entry for Altrip, it gives all three of those variations. The first being Altrip, used by the family. The second, Althorpe, that is more used by the local neighbourhood to point at it. And thirdly, it gives the option of Althrop, which it says is now old-fashioned. But they're all valid in their own way. I use the first recommendation, and that is the one that the family used, and my family used, and that the BBC uses. But call it what you will. Call it pooper scooper if you want. But the thrill of the thrift was opening up this book that I'd ordered from eBay and finding a name inside of the previous owner, Dickon Reid, 15th of the 4th, 1995, in London. I didn't know the name, so I got Googling. And what did I discover? Dickon Reid was formerly the head of drama of the BBC World Service. Isn't that something? The head of drama. And he was actually, according to online articles, hugely influential and produced a lot of work, a ton of work, much of which you might have known. And he was highly esteemed in his era. So isn't that something, my dear, that his copy of this book that he would have referred to, presumably from the 90s onwards, as it is marked, has fallen into my hands to show you on the broadcast. Isn't that fabulous? Isn't it magical? He died last year at the age of 82, so evidently his effects have been up for grabs. And I learned that he had also, as well as working at Bush House, he had worked at the Arts Council as well. And as I mentioned, I've worked in both of those two places as well at some point in my life. So I felt we had a connection there. And somebody wrote as part of an obituary that Dickon could be abrasive yet also wonderfully warm and supportive. And I'd like to think that perhaps that's how some might sum me up, because I wouldn't want to be remembered as all sweetness and light. A little bit of abrasiveness, a little bit of juice to the fruit doesn't do any harm, does it, my dear? So actually, I read between the lines a bit. The first adjective they used to describe him was abrasive, but warm and sweet, or whatever it was. That kind of told me that perhaps he was a bit of a git as well at times. Who knows? I'm just kind of guessing there. Maybe you knew him. Did you know of Dickon Reid? Please do furnish me with any further information, because it's all the little breadcrumbs and morsels that lead to these 11 loaves of delight, isn't it, my dear? Let's munch on them together. Thank you for munching with me. Let's munch again another time. And of course, I do send a special thank you to those of you who sent a tip jar treat along to add to my own funds, of course, for the trinkets and for the occasional cup of coffee. Thank you. Much appreciated. Catch up with you next time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and toodle pip.